Morning, friends.
Good morning.
Happy Mother's Day to you mothers. I'm sure you're doing the best you can and did the best you could. And I respect that. So good on you. What? Okay, so over the next few weeks we're going to have a look at the details of Christianity. We're going to get into the details, and my promise to you is that by the end of this series you'll understand the Christian faith a wee bit better than you presently do. Specifically, we're going to be getting into a bit of the Bible called the letter of St. Paul to the Romans, which, as the title suggests, is a letter that St. Paul wrote to the Romans. So let's just dig right in, and we're learning so much, and I'm excited. I hope you are too. Right, so here's a familiar image. If you breathe deeply, you can almost smell the lasagna. What could be more Roman than the Colosseum? What you probably don't know is that the Italians built the Colosseum to cover over Italy's most embarrassing building. That building was built by this man, the Emperor Nero, who, in the words of his own propaganda machine, and this is important to understand Christianity in the New Testament, here's what the emperor says of himself in the middle of the first century. He is the Saviour of the world. He is the Prince of Peace. He is the Son of God. His birth is heralded as good news to all men, and there is no other name under heaven by which a man might be saved but by the name of Nero. Before I tell you about the embarrassing building that Nero built, let me tell you a couple of things about the man himself. Thing number one, Nero lived an ethically challenged sort of a life. For example, I thought I'd mention this in it's Mother's Day. One year he sent his mother on a cruise. Nice, right? Better than the flowers. A cruise. However, he didn't like his mother. So he removed a couple of the timbers from below the waterline so that the ship would sink on the cruise. And the ship did sink. However, Nero's mother-in-law was a tough old bird and she could swim. So she made it to the shore, got back to her own house traumatized. Nero was upset that she had the audacity to live, so he sent some goons to her house and had her beaten to death. His own mother. He had his brother poisoned during dinner. He killed his first wife because his second wife was more attractive, and he killed his second wife for no reason at all, and he killed her by kicking her repeatedly in the stomach while she was pregnant. As I said, ethically challenged. Even in the brutal cultures of the ancient world, Nero's behaviour was shocking. And so, as you can imagine, all over the empire, in coffee shops and gymnasiums, people are talking about the moral vacuum. They're talking about the lack of ethics, of a code, of righteousness, of integrity. It's the number one subject during Nero's turbulent reign. Second thing to tell you about Nero was that the dude liked to party. I think I'm being accurate when I say that of all the men who ever lived, none have ever been so dedicated to the pursuit of pleasure than Nero. His parties were legendary, and it was this need to party that caused him to build the building that after he died Rome wanted to forget. Here's a artist's reconstruction of what it looked like, so you can see where the Colosseum fits today. So Nero built this huge building called the House of Gold. And the reason he called it a house of gold was because it was a house literally covered in gold leaf. The walls were marble, the floors were mosaic, there were fountains in the hallway. Outside the door of his golden house, he erected a golden statue of himself, 35 meters high, very nice. At the center of his party mansion was this room. So this is a big, it doesn't look like much here, but in its day this was probably the most amazing room on earth. A giant hexagonal room. The ceiling, there was a false ceiling stars and so on were painted on the bottom of the ceiling, and the ceiling rotated. And as it rotated, it rained down rose petals and drops of perfume on guests below. So picture the scene. The great and the good are at one of Nero's Roman parties. Toga, toga, toga. You remember, right? There's a band playing in the corner. There's exotic dancers in another corner. There's food on a grand scale. The wine is flowing like water. And all the while it's snowing rose petals and droplets of perfume. One writer from the period said disapprovingly that it wasn't unusual at these parties for some of Nero's drunken guests to become suffocated under the weight of falling rose petals. So this is Rome of the Romans. On the one hand, it is a confident, muscular city. It is the city of the world. On a daily basis, in the rooms, in its marble-clad buildings, the fate of humankind is decided. But on the other hand, and this matters, in the 50s and 60s and 70s of the first century, Rome is a city increasingly shocked by its lack of morality, increasingly disturbed at its lack of moral code, at the vacuum of decency that exists at the heart of its own government. And in this city, there is a church. And to this church, the Apostle Paul says this: I thank my God through Jesus Christ for all of you, because your faith is being reported all over the world. Now, the church in Rome probably got its start right after the resurrection from people who'd been visiting Jerusalem for Passover. And so what Paul is saying here is tremendously encouraging. He's saying, guys, I travel. I get around. I've been all over the empire. I visited every church. Some big, some small, some doing a great job, some doing a not so great job. And I got to tell you, all across the empire, our brothers and sisters are tremendously encouraged that there is a church at the heart of Nero's moral vacuum. That in a place where there is no good, there are a few people invested in good. Who would have thought, he seems to be saying here, that this Christian thing would make its way from the obscure villages of northern Palestine all the way to Nero's golden house? Who would have thought you would be there, believing what you believe, doing what you do? Your very existence as a Christian in that place is amazing and encouraging. Then he says, I want you to know that I remember you in my prayers at all times. And I pray now at last, by God's will, the way may be opened for me to come to you. So I'm going to come, pay you a visit, we'll have pizza, it'll be great. Then look at what he says next. Regarding this visit, I long to see you, so that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. Notice the direction in the sentence. He wants to give something. Two kinds of people in this life: givers and takers. The takers drain you, the givers make you better. And if you're entirely surrounded by takers, I don't know what to tell you. You're going to get taken. Now, the gift that he is referring to here, that he wants to give them, is in one of the spiritual gifts that he mentions elsewhere in the Bible. They're not his to give. The gift that he's referring to here specifically is a detailed explanation of the Christian faith. He's saying to them, just because you're a Christian doesn't necessarily mean you really understand Christianity yet. Just because you sincerely believe in Jesus, and I believe that you do, doesn't mean that you properly or fully understand what Jesus did for you on the cross and in his resurrection. And I want to give that to you. And I know that when I give it to you, you'll be so much stronger as you navigate a moral life in Nero's moral vacuum. And then he stops himself halfway through the sentence because he realizes that that sentence is patronizing. To say that I'll visit you and I'll make you stronger and after I talk to you your life will be so much better sounds very one-sided. So he stops himself in this verse and says, no. What I actually mean is that I'll talk with you and you'll talk with me and that together, notice, we'll be mutually encouraged by one another's faith. Paul knows that when he visits the church in Rome, he'll help them, absolutely. But he also knows that in helping them, he'll get helped in return. And I think that's the way life works. I think it's impossible to give and to help and to pour yourself out without not only getting something in return, but often getting more in return than what you give in the first place. And I think that's your experience of life in small ways as well. So, for example, I'll bet that in some of your homes on the fridge, this is probably going to sound creepy as if I've like snuck into your home and seen what's on the fridge. But I'll bet that somewhere in your home on the fridge you have a picture of a child you support in the two-thirds world. Right? So every month you send your $35 to some organization that helps a child in the Dominican Republic or something, and you're giving. You're 100% giving. And you're helping. 100% you are helping. You're absolutely making the life of that child better. But the traffic doesn't stop there, does it? The photo you get from that child, the letter you get from that child, it means something to you. You receive something from it, and that's why you stick it on your fridge and are so proud of it. Often, the more you give, the more you get. That's how it works. So he's saying, when I help you in your faith, you'll help me in mine. It'll be great. Next sentence. I do not want you to be unaware. Ignorance. It's a shame to have to say this, I suppose, but I think some of you were raised in a culture that aspired to intelligence and valued it. I think that's less and less the case now. I think now we admire stupidity and trivia and are suspicious of intelligence and are suspicious of knowledge. So I like this sentence in the Bible. I don't want you to be ignorant. Ignorance isn't bliss. Knowledge is always power. I want you to know that I planned many times to come to you, but I couldn't work it out. In order, then look at this sentence. Love this. In order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I had among all the other Gentiles. What I love about that sentence is it's brimming with self-confidence. What he's saying here is, here's how it's going to go down. I'm going to come, I'm going to do stuff, and that stuff is going to work. I'm going to come, I'm going to do stuff, I'm going to take steps, and the steps are going to lead to results, and those results are going to be awesome. Why not? Why not talk that way? Why not have that voice in your head that says the things I'm going to try are going to work? The things I'm going to do are going to lead to better places. The steps I take will lead me to a better life. I mean, it might not be true, but it's better than believing the alternative. Regarding the taking of those steps, he says, I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, to the wise and the foolish. So, in the first century, a Greek wasn't a person who necessarily came from Greece. A Greek was a person who was conversant in the ideas and aspirations of the enlightened culture of Greece. So a Greek was an educated person. A Greek was a person who knew their Socrates from their Shakespeare, their Claret from their Beaujolais, their Chardonnay from their Chablis. And a non-Greek was the opposite of that. A non-Greek was uneducated, uncultured, the sort of person who would watch American Idol on a Thursday night and then talk about it at work on Friday morning. So, us. And the key word in this sentence is obligated. He's saying to the church, I don't care if it's caviar or Cheetos. I don't care if it's champagne or chips, because for me, knowing the Jesus who died obligates me to those for whom he died. That's probably quite a good sentence, I should say it again. Knowing the Jesus who died obligates me to those for whom he died. And for whom did he die? Exactly. And the content of that obligation, notice, is to preach the gospel to you who are at Rome. A gospel of which he says, notice, he is not ashamed. So, when the early church referred to the gospel or used the word gospel, they were using that word to refer to the entire content of the Jesus story. And Paul, it seems, is not unaware that for the inhabitants of Rome, that story has certain logical gaps. Not because the story of Jesus being born of a virgin and suffering under Pontius Pilate and dying and rising on the third day isn't a great story. It is a great story. The logical gap Paul is aware of is the connection that Paul will make between that story of a suffering Jesus to the lives of the people in ancient Rome. So Paul is not saying, I will come to Rome and tell you a story. He's saying, I will come to Rome and tell you a story that changes the lives of those who hear it. And seeing as how that story is about an unknown carpenter who lived in many ways an unexceptional, completely unsuccessful, and from a certain point of view, completely failed life. That story doesn't make sense in Rome. Rome is a city of power, of wealth, of prestige. Rome is a city where the man at the centre of that power and wealth and prestige says of himself that he is the saviour of the world, the Prince of Peace, the Son of God. There is no name under heaven by which a man might be saved but by the name of Nero. And I've got a 35-metre gold statue of myself to drive the point home. I have a roof that rains so much rose petals down it suffocates my drunk guests. That's how awesome I am. And the early church used this exact same vocabulary of power, of salvation, of everything, to talk about a carpenter from Palestine who lost, who was the antithesis of everything they valued. That's a logical gap. So Paul is careful to say, I don't care what you think. I don't care how nonsensical it is, or how embarrassing it might be to talk about this. I am not ashamed of this story. Because that story, notice the next word, is the power of God. Power. Interesting word to use in writing to a city that was all too aware of its own power. Imperial cities tend to be self-conscious about that kind of thing. For example, if you ever visit London in the UK, you'll notice, you can't help but notice that the architecture it's bold, it's confident. So this building here is so that's the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, right at the heart of Whitehall. And you walk past this office, and it sinks in from this relatively small building. 1/5 of the world's population used to be governed. It's supremely confident. It's supremely bold architecture. Washington D.C. same way today. Everything about the way the city is and the way the city is constructed says we are aware of power. We are aware of our own strength and confidence. Rome, similarly, needed no lessons on power. It was the power of the Roman army that subdued the conquered peoples of the empire. It was the power of the Roman navy that subjugated the pirates in the Mediterranean. It was the power of Roman engineering that gave the world straight roads and usable aqueducts. It was the power of Roman currency that gave the world a universal set of values. Roman justice was the ultimate arbiter of right and wrong. These people brimmed with an awareness of their own power. To speak of power in ancient Rome was to speak of an administration that ruled the world, or of a genius that could build for itself a house of gold that could rain down rose petals and perfume. And similarly, when the Bible speaks about the power of God, it isn't speaking so much about who God is, but rather specifically about what God can do and what God is capable of. And even more specifically, when the Bible speaks about what God can do and what God is capable of, it is almost universally speaking about what God can do with sin. When we talk about the power of God in the Bible, we're talking about God and all the mistakes you've made. We're talking about God and all the mistakes you are prone to make. We're talking about God and all the mistakes you have yet to make. To talk about the power of God in the Bible is to talk about you and all of that brokenness. So notice the train of thought. The gospel is the power of God for what? For the salvation of everyone who believes. So unlike Nero in his house of gold, the power of God is not for its own sake or its own pleasure. It is for the salvation of everyone who believes. And to think, without going too much into it, I'll go into it in a few weeks in more detail, but you can intuitively understand, I think, what that sentence means. Salvation is, if nothing else, a nice word. It isn't a word that you hear, it's a word that you feel, and you feel it strongest at the point of your weakness, at the point of your failure, at the point of your mistake. So this salvation, follow the words, is for whom? Not for the good, and not for everyone. For everyone who believes. The word belief that Paul uses here is a word that belongs to the faith family of words. And in the Bible, faith is always and is only a response that a sinful person makes to what Jesus did for them on the cross. So as we come to a church and we learn that on the cross God poured out his anger at sin onto Jesus, as we learn that Jesus' death on the cross was a death that our sins deserved, and that consequently, having already punished Jesus for the mistakes we did make and are prone to make and have yet to make, God is then able to forgive us. As we learn that stuff in church, our response as sinful people has been to say, that's for me. I'm in. I could use some of that. Thank you very much. This is for me. So faith in the Bible isn't an ability that we have. It's not even a virtue. Faith in the Bible is a response that a sinful person makes to what Jesus did for them on the cross. And they consider that as being the thing that makes them right with God. And speaking of being right, he then says, wrapping it up, for in the gospel, in this story about the Jesus who lost, who was born, who lived, who taught, who died, and who rose, the righteousness from God is revealed. A righteousness that is by faith. So in the Roman world, while Nero is battering his mother, poisoning his brother, and assaulting his pregnant wife, whilst throwing $1 million parties in his house of gold. While all of that is happening, the people of Rome are asking the question, what does it mean to be right? All of the literature from the period, Christian and Stoic, is obsessed with this subject. What does it mean to live a right life? To be good, to be solid, to have a moral compass and a code that's worth something, to conduct yourself right in an unright world. What does that mean? What does that look like? This is the great obsession of the era. In the Roman world, the conclusion that they came to was that a right life was a life free of mistakes, free of moral defects. That was a right life. The Jewish people in Rome, however, viewed rightness as relational. So they would say, if you and me are in business together, here's what right looks like. I treat you right, you treat me right, we're right, we're all good. And the church in Rome are Jewish Christians living in Rome. So they had this meshed idea of what right looked like. Here's a right life. A right life is one that is morally right and relationally right. So being right with God then, in the world of the first century Bible, is this. It is a life where God looks at you and says, we're good. We're good. You, me, we're good. You're right with me. You are right with me. The church in Rome came to that conclusion on their own. But Paul corrects them. And the correction he makes is difficult to grasp. Because the church in Rome believed that this business of being right with God only happened after a person died. So they believed that a person would die, and they would, the whole pearly gates scenario, and God would open the books and go, it's not looking good, it's not looking good. Jesus died for you, forgave you. You're right. You're good. Welcome to heaven. You're good. Paul takes that forward. He takes that forward to the life of a Christian in the here and now, and says that the judgment of righteousness that God is going to give you in the next life, He gives to you now. And so the great scandal of the early Christian message is, you who are so prone to mistake, who are so prone to succumb to that dark side, you are right with me. Right here. Right now. We're good. We're good. That's the power for Paul of the Jesus story. A power that would allow these people to navigate the morally complex world of ancient Rome by believing of themselves that they were right, even though in so many ways they seemed not to be. Martin Luther said something interesting about this. He said, righteousness isn't something that an angry God requires of sinful people, but rather it is something that a merciful God bestows on humanity through faith in Jesus. Not a moral demand, but a gift. You're right with me. So, church in Rome, he's saying here, through your faith in Jesus, through staking it all on what He did for you on the cross, you don't have to wring your hands and look in the mirror and get all anxious about whether or not your good deeds are going to outweigh your bad deeds, or whether or not you've been okay enough to spend a wee bit of time in purgatory or whatever it is keeps you awake at night. In Jesus, you can know right here, right now, that insofar as you're trusting that what He did for you on the cross was enough, you are right with the God who is your judge. The moment you put your faith in Him, the final verdict of your life is given. You are right with God. You are right with God. The challenge that we always face when we leave church and go into the week is to be what God already says we are. So there's the homework to you and to me. You're right with God. Now go live like it. Go live like it. Bless you. Thank you for coming. God bless you. See you next time.